More people join us later. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our event tonight, a conversation with poet and MLA alumni, Doyle-Gillespie.
Hello, hello.
And my name is Tristan Cabello. I'm the Associate Director for the Master of Liberal Arts at the Johns Hopkins University. And today it's my great pleasure to welcome back Ed to the program and discuss his latest book, Father of the Red Grotto Used Bookstore, which is edited by Loyola Maryland Press. The event is recorded. It will last between 45 minutes. We've had several events with Ed in the past, and usually what we do is that we discuss the book, we discuss Ed's experience being a poet and MLA alumni for 25-30 minutes. And then we have time for 10-15 minutes for a Q&A. And so you do so many things, Ed, that the first question that I want to ask here is how would you present yourself? How would you introduce yourself? Who are you? What's your background? Where do you come from?
Yeah. Well, I often talk about the fact that I grew up in Philadelphia and went to the same school for 13 years. And I've that's a really good question. I think I've been thinking more along the lines of saying I'm a teacher and a writer.
Yeah.
And I that's been like kind of the most salubrious thing for me, and I really like that. So yeah, I would say no issue with coming forth. First was saying a writer, at least a budding writer.
Yeah. I'm just gonna ask everybody to. I can mute you all. Just to mute your microphone. Let me unmute.
Here we go.
Oh, you can unmute yourself. Okay, great.
He's-
And so,
Can you
can
hear
you
me?
talk about? Can everybody mute their microphone? Yeah, we can hear you, Ed.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, can you talk a little bit about your experience in the MLA program too? That's what I wanted to hear, and also how it has. You are also a police officer. You are also a poet. How do you make sense of all of that? How does that fit all together?
Well, it's funny when I was in the MLA program and I was trying to explain it to family
Yeah,
members, like, so what are you studying? And I said, well,
yeah,
it's interdisciplinarity. So you see, and I would talk about it. My father-in-law said, so it's general studies. I said, no, it's not. It's not just general studies. I
yeah,
mean, so it's really, I tried to get them to understand it's a type of logic. That there's an underlying thread of a type of logic, and we take that through multiple disciplines. And that's been really useful for me for one thing, and just planning humanities curriculum, teaching the humanities that nothing is silos are artificial.
yeah,
The silo is artificial, and I mean, if you're going to study any, and I'll speak for the humanities first off, just because that's my bailiwick,
yeah,
that everything is interconnected. And I mean, of course, you can't leave the sciences out of that as well. You everything is interconnected, and so it's actually quite natural. I think the
mhm,
logic of interdisciplinarity, and so the MLA helped me focus that. It helped me see that. It helped me focus that. It gave me ideas for how to parse that out for students and for myself to always look for the interdisciplinarity in any given thing. You
yeah.
know,
And so, can you talk more? Because there's a lot of connection between the MLA program and your day job, and the MLA program and your poetry. Like, can you talk about those two connections?
yeah, it was policing. It's funny because I think I went into policing thinking it would be a very kind of monodimensional thing, but
Yeah,
it tackles every intelligence. And
yeah,
what I found most useful, the MLA was most useful for me when I was planning curriculum and teaching police officers
yeah,
because, you know, you can have, I told them, some of the worst, most horrendous police officers in the worst totalitarian states could shoot guns, drive cars, use equipment, things like that. But getting them to understand the ethos of what we do as Western police officers that was where it was funny to me just how functional the MLA was for me. I mean,
yeah,
just how brass tacks, like,
yeah, yeah,
here's
yeah.
this question, how do you answer it from several different vantage points?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's also a conversation that I've had with many students. I mean, it's uh, this question that you get from family members or friends. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with that? What is this about? What is the MLA
Mhm.
about? Well, actually, the skills that you learn in the MLA are lifelong skills. I mean, you will use them all the time. And so here, it's interesting to see the connection between being a police officer and the MLA program. I mean, those two work very well together, actually. And that's important to know that. And what about the connection between your journey in poetry and the MLA program? Is this something that started in the MLA program? I'm not
Oh,
sure.
wow. So that's the MLA program. It really did kind of create a, a platform for me to have a greater understanding of poetry, the
Yeah,
discipline of it. So I'd always written, and I'd started writing poetry in high school. Okay, and we can forgive ourselves for that poetry we write in high school. But I think it was Margaret Atwood said, "Every writer that you've been had a right to exist." At that point, so as I a lot of the writing that I did prior to the MLA, I would say, was very cathartic. Even while I was in the MLA, I wasn't really thinking that much about the poetry, and it was very cathartic. It was very emotional and very confessional type stuff. And it was good. I mean, I go back to it. I'm like, this was decent. This is what it needed to say. But it's funny as you get deeper into any given discipline, it becomes interdisciplinary necessarily. You start to
hmm,
understand it deeper. And as I started looking deeper into poetry and understanding, it's funny because what I was writing,
yeah,
as I look at, say, a structuralist point of view on literature, it was very author centric. It was very much about the author, and so I kind of inadvertently started going down the Roland Barthes way of saying, let's do away with the author and get more into the form and more into the content.
yeah,
And I found that one thing in particular, as my work grew in terms of lexical difficulty,
hmm,
as that grew, it then started to span out into different disciplines, right? Because
yeah,
if I'm going to find the semiotic codes, right? If I'm writing and I'm taking on really that discipline of, what's the code here?
hmm,
I start getting into the semiotics of it, right? The
yeah,
signs, the symbols, the indexes, that starts to come from different disciplines. And so
yeah,
I start to pull on art and anthropology. I mean, I know for me, like I would say, art, anthropology, myth became huge with me. That's always been big with me. Myth,
yeah,
anthropology, history. So I started pulling those things together and looking at, okay, how do I create the semiotic code and what I'm trying to say?
yeah,
How do I
yeah,
create the actual semiotic um, cipher that
yeah,
I'm going to give to the reader? And it's about the reader as opposed to the reader saying, wow, look at the experience that this poet had. The reader trying to involve themselves in the semiotics of the poem and the form of the poem itself.
yeah,
That I realized as time went on, that became the most important thing to me. Um, who wrote it, why they wrote it, what my personal experience was that's not the point. The point
yeah.
is what the reader gets out of it. So that is one big piece, the lexical difficulty of the poem. Another big piece is the defamiliarization of language, right?
Yeah.
That um, the work that I did at the MLA helped me
Can
look
you
at it.
explain maybe what you mean by defamiliarization of language?
If I take a word or take a concept
Yeah,
that's something that's familiar, something that's normal, I mean, I think I've got that in some of the pieces I talk about here, and use the words in some way that makes you stop and say, why did you use that word in that way? That's incorrect. Maybe it's not incorrect. Or that if I can do something like that, then it jars the reader deeper into the poem, right?
hmm,
Just like the lexical difficulty, it gets you to start reading, rereading, trying to understand why that word was used in that way.
yeah.
which takes you deeper to the form and deeper into the story. You know, um, so I think, but I really do look at, and it's funny because it kind of came organically for me that like as I wanted to make it more um, make make the poetry more in line with the discipline of poetics,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Then it
yeah,
naturally became interdisciplinary.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And this is going to resonate with a lot of students that I'm teaching this semester because I'm teaching Roland Barthes this semester in critical theory. So it's going to make a lot of sense for them. So let's talk maybe a little bit shortly. You published another book before this one. What was that book one? What was that first book about?
Okay, so that was called gentrifying the plague house, and
Yeah, and just if I can cut you off just for 1 minute, just to tell everybody that we actually have another video available on the AAP website where Ed talks about this first book.
okay. Um, so it's funny. I started that piece before COVID with
Yeah,
7 poems written in 7 days in
yeah,
a writer's
yeah, yeah,
residency,
yeah,
and that book ultimately became about. It ultimately turned into a book a lot about social isolation and about social justice,
yeah.
and I mixed in a fair amount of magical realism with that. That was a lot of fun. I
Hmm.
I've a real love the of magical realism and a lot of the Latin American writers that use it, and
Yeah.
so I took some liberties with that. I think as I
Hmm.
tried to. So again, it was a matter of saying talking about um, some very quotidian things in very unfamiliar terms, very quotidian things in very supernatural terms. That was a lot of fun. That was neat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And so we're here to talk about the new book.
mhm.
And so, yeah, same question. How would you introduce this book? What is the main theme? Is there a main theme? What were your inspirations? How is it different from your first book?
So it's funny. You kind of do your pieces one at a time and
Yeah,
then start looking at how they interconnect. And a friend of mine the other night, we were at Bird in Hand, and she said, it's so great that you wrote a book about books. That you wrote a book
yeah,
about reading and writing in books. And
hmm,
I said, "Oh, yeah, I guess it is." And so really, this turned into a piece about storytelling, um, the different forms of storytelling, whether it's folklore and mythology or the storytelling that takes place within a relationship, just one person to the other, and the folklore of a family, the folklore of an intimate relationship. You know, that's really what it's turned into, and
yeah,
I, yeah, and I feel very compelled by that. I think when I think about it, that's probably been on my mind a lot. That narratives, narratives, writing and storytelling are kind of at a tipping point in our society.
yeah, yeah,
You and so I think that's been on my mind a bit, and that's what came out in this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And to go back to the MLA program, how has the MLA program or your studies in the MLA program influenced your writing in this book, especially in terms of what we talked about before, in terms of social justice, in terms of interdisciplinary approaches, and so on and so forth?
Right. Well, if anything, the MLA was constantly challenging me to look at things from with different voices,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
various
yeah,
points of view and different voices, and there was no real beaten track there, and so I think that really did fuel me for looking at things from marginalized perspectives. That was
hmm,
huge.
hmm,
Um,
hmm,
Looking at things from non-traditional points of view. Uh, to the point that when I wrote my project, I wrote a 100-page project. I did it on martial arts as tools of cultural resistance,
yeah,
and so it was all written from the point of view of the marginalized. Yeah, so
yeah,
definitely the voices continued for me.
yeah, yeah. And so when we're preparing for this event, I asked you to select maybe one or two pieces out of the book that maybe you could read and also flesh out, I mean, explain to the audience, what the poem is about. So we all ears.
Sure, okay. This is called Chimney. A good place to start is a chimney left alone in the middle of the woods. It will be drenched in moss, lost against the verdant chaos, feigning as though it grows from the floor of the forest itself. With a chimney lost so long in the middle of the woods, you can ask your questions aloud for the first time. Time and time again, it will deny the broken square of the house that birthed it. It is natural, it will say, as the split wood fence that hides itself in a nearby thicket, mimicking the trees and the bramble confusion. It makes the same sense as the overgrown rails, cross ties, and field-side spikes that hide the wild oriental bittersweet. That chimney will testify that it grows as wild here as do the lichen headstones that grow down the road, sprouting from the loam, knowing nothing of the mason's work, the withered flower tributes, or the soldier skeleton boys buried beneath their monumental feet. This was inspired by literally a chimney that I found in the woods in the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts. And I'm always fascinated by things that kind of bear silent testimony to history, right? And so then using personification, so this uses personification to say, well, what's your identity? What's the identity of this silent sentinel, right? If it were sentient, why would it think of itself as being linked to the human world, linked to the outside world, when clearly that has gone, everything's gone fallow here, right? So it asks a question about identity, right?
Yeah, very
I think that,
beautiful.
as this started guiding me as I was writing
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And can you share another one, maybe another extract from the book?
Okay. Okay. This is called Gala for the Opening of the Art Nouveau Wing. When you create the context, make sure she is next to Klimt's kiss, and that flat champagne will sustain her through the marble sarcophagus and the largesse of brittle revenant women. She is looping two fingers through the black high heel slingbacks that she replaced with bare feet against the slick stone floor. She is arching in towards the gold leaf pear, undone red hair, and saying, "This girl is in her rapture, I swear." This has been one of my favorite pieces for a long time. I love that painting. And it obviously, we will never have a definitive answer as to what she's thinking. If we were to take a look at that, is she swooning? Is she turning away from him? But the storyteller, I think the most important thing here is how it compels the storyteller, the young woman here who is kind of tossed off these conventions, so she's here, but she's not. She's in her world. The woman in the painting is in her world. And, I'm kind of in love with people that are in their world.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ed. Those are really great pieces. And there's one question that I want to ask you. We didn't talk about this when we were preparing the event, but um, a lot of our students are trying to get published and to publish their books or their collection of poetry. Can you talk a little bit more about how the publishing process went for you? How did you find your publisher? Was it difficult? What did you go through?
So one thing I did was, just making a lot of contact and kind of putting yourself out there. So
Yeah,
obviously search engines are great, and you can pretty much say, I want to publish this sort of thing here or there.
yeah,
Um, So it's a mixed bag of things, but I think it was between search engines and Bookfest, walking
Mhm.
around talking to people at Bookfest and at City Lit. So just finding as many avenues as possible and putting yourself out there. Um, One thing too is make sure you have a lot of, find those good trusted people and have them read your work.
Yeah,
Read your work, edit your work, read your work, edit your work, and then start shopping it around. But I talked to one guy who said, well, there's this place that wants to publish my work. They said I just need to pay them. I said, yeah, that's not it. That's
yeah, of
it.
course. Mhm.
But
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
mean,
can you talk also about the reception of your work? How do you promote it? What do you do?
so um, truth be told, social media is great for
Hmm.
promotion.
Yeah,
Starting with establishing relationships with bookstores, establishing relationships with the library.
yeah,
That's been great. Um, and it's funny to me how things have grown just based on a lot of that.
yeah,
That
yeah,
when I've gone to Goodreads and looked up my book and someone I didn't know has
yeah,
put, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
where I
No,
run
and
into
there's a
people that,
lot of press about you online. There's a lot of
"Hmm,
articles. I mean, you won awards, you won a list for awards. So yeah, I mean, there's really definitely a lot there.
yeah, yeah. So, and
Yeah,
I feel fortunate. I really do. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's like
And
I
so, as
people,
I mentioned to you before, so a lot of our students are actually publishing their work, and a lot of our students want to publish their works. We've had a student who just published a biography of the first president of the Johns Hopkins University. I know that we have another student who published a great textbook on anti-Semitism that's being used in the classroom. And I want to ask you, so you got those two books published. Are you thinking about the next one? What's next for you?
absolutely. I have many more ideas.
Yeah,
So I have more books coming up. I've been working on what was supposed to be a short story and is now about 180 pages. So I might have a novella coming
yeah,
out.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
got
yeah,
a
yeah.
science fiction novel I've worked on for years, and my buddy is helping me work with this
Yeah.
monstrosity. And so I've got those things going, and I'm really excited about all of that. I'm excited about new writing projects, and I'm hoping to find myself back in the classroom sometime soon.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Yeah,
Hoping, yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, great. And so we do have time for questions. If anybody wants to ask a question in the audience, please feel free to unmute your mic, or you can also pop your question in the chat box here. But one question that I wanted to ask, actually,
Mhm.
Ed, is also you made a lot of connections. So you're from Baltimore, you are in Baltimore, you were in the program at a time where the program was only on site at the brick and mortar school. How is your work connected to Baltimore? Because it seems that it is heavily connected to Baltimore, right?
Yeah, it's Baltimore is just a fecund place for in terms of writing fodder. My gosh.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so a lot of it, like I said, came from my work in law enforcement and
yeah.
just these distilled pieces of human narrative that I would pick up. Um, it's there are just so many moments and places and things in Baltimore. It's very compelling in terms of writing, so that's been huge. I mean, my living in Baltimore, my writing in Baltimore has been huge
Yeah,
for
and
me.
and 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 another question. I mean, it seems that the literary scene, the art scene in Baltimore, is huge too. I mean, are you connected to a lot of other poets, writers, artists in Baltimore?
Yes, and I've been trying to connect even more. I really have because we have got so much to share. I'm naturally kind of introverted, so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have to kind
yeah,
of push myself out of
yeah,
my
yeah,
comfort zone. But yes, with this last we had the Remington Book Festival, and it was just so great being around other writers and sharing experiences. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's been wonderful. So I'm looking forward to more of that, more and more of that.
Any questions for Ed? If there's no questions, maybe Ed, you can remind everybody of where we can find the book.
Hello,
Sure.
sorry, I have a
Oh, there's
question.
a question.
Oh,
Sorry.
hey.
Hi, good evening. This is Destiny.
Hi. Hi,
Hey,
Um,
Destiny.
Destiny.
hey, how are you? I just wanted,
Good.
well, I wanted to make a comment to connect to the use of the language that you used and the
Mhm.
way that you chose to use it, because that did stand out to me when you mentioned that earlier, because I did find myself pausing to read and reread, and I even found myself looking up words to find the exact definition, because the way that you did use it, I was like, how does that go in this, in this example? How does this word fit? But in a way, they all did fit. But now my question is in connection to the Women in the Half Moon Cafe Past Dark poem. Was
Mhm.
there a reason, or is there a significance behind you choosing that poem to expand on? You do have three variations of that title, but is it a reason that you chose that poem to continue on?
Okay, so why make the trilogy out of that? Um, I liked the idea. I feel compelled by the idea of a place, the idea of place, and the role of that in a creative culture. Um, so it's almost like if you ever look at the that painting Nighthawks, you've seen that? The little cafe with the Hollywood people in it. You get the impression that this is where they go, right? This is their fertile ground. This is where they go. And so I think that spoke to me in terms of what happens to this place. This place is witness to the creative process for these people, and there's a symbiotic relationship between the two. And so it just kind of I felt I felt like it asked for more. It asked for one more. It asked for another. So that was really the kind of the soil of that piece. I hope that answers.
Yes, yes, thank you. It does kind of, as a reader, creates a sense of familiar, like you kind of can connect, I guess, connectivity. You connect to this place that seems cozy and comfortable, and that does get revisited throughout that book. So it connects. I agree.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Another question for Ed? No? But let me thank you, Ed, for doing this for us. It's always a pleasure to have you back. I know that we will have you back
Thank you
uh,
so
more
much.
and more times.
Yeah.
And it's always great to talk to you about your work and also see how much the MLA has influenced you in your work as a poet, as a policeman too, and how productive you are with all those publications. So it's already two books, and there's apparently more in the making. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ed. The event is going to be online probably by tomorrow or the day after, and you can rewatch it and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ed, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
you very soon. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much.
Bye.